welcome back to the Pair Program. I'm your host, Tim Winkler, alongside my co-host, Mike Gruen. Mike, today is National Picky Eaters Day. So I got to ask, what's a food that you refused to eat as a kid, but you swear by now?
That I swear by now?
Yeah.
Interesting. I was actually, so the joke in my family was I was Mikey, like Mikey only did anything. So it was my brother. I'm the youngest. I wasn't a picky eater. My brother was super picky. But I've always liked broccoli. I think it's actually gone the other way. As a kid, I liked Brussels sprouts, and as an adult, unless they're cooked, they have to be cooked a certain way, then I love them. But like I used to be able to just eat Brussels sprouts, steamed, whatever. So I think it's actually gone a little bit the other way. I wasn't that picky as a kid.
Oh,
what about you?
Yeah, I'm actually Brussels sprouts. You took the answer right out of my mouth. I mean, I didn't used to like them, but now, get them crispy, drizzle like some balsamic and
there you go.
Bacon on them.
Yeah. Bacon on them.
but a no for me is cottage cheese. Just the texture, everything about it just doesn't work for me.
Interesting.
All right. Well, let's jump into a little bit about what today's episode is all about. So we're going to be exploring how veterans are kind of shaping the future of defense tech innovation, specifically by leading startups, as they transition from active duty to civilian life. Now, this is a moment that defense tech is having where startups are focusing on everything from autonomous systems to defense manufacturing, logistics, supply chain management. So many different areas that defense is modernizing right before our eyes. And so at this moment, we're seeing a lot of opportunities that are actively being created for transitioning active duty military, reservist, and this defense tech startup ecosystem. And so we want to dive deeper into this on the episode. And to do so, we've got two excellent leaders in the space to help us tackle this topic. First, we have Dr. Casey Perley, the director of the Army Applications Laboratory, or AAL. Casey and her team are rethinking how the Army engages with startups through programs like Spartan that help kind of cut through the red tape and open the doors for agile, innovative tech to enter the mission. And joining Casey is Guy Filippelli, managing partner at Squadra Ventures and chairman of the Commit Foundation. Guy is a former Army officer who transitioned into the founder world, and he now focuses on backing veteran-led startups and helping service members build meaningful careers after military life. Casey and Guy, welcome to the Pair Program. Excited to have you all.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us. I'm so excited.
Yeah, and I got to point out a quick fun fact that my esteemed co-host, Mike Gruen here, worked with Guy at, I think this was your first product startup, Guy, Red Owl Analytics, years back. So
it was. It felt like it was Mike's first as well. I'm not sure if that was the case.
I love it. This will be a fun one. Yeah. This will be some good perspectives. All right. Now, before we dive in, we kick things off with a fun segment called Pair Me Up. We'll go around the room quickly, shout out two things that just go perfectly together. So Mike, kick us off.
Yeah. So in my usual way, I'm going a little non-traditional. I was thinking about when I worked with Guy and some of the stuff that I really enjoyed about Red Owl and things like that. And so my pairing is actually like working in the office and getting out of the office, like the reasons to get out. So at Red Owl, we had a lot of these things. We had like Snowball Thursdays, which in Baltimore, snowballs are like an ice cream thing, like a custard, whatever. And we had Froyo Friday. It was like all of these like different like activities. So like just stuff that now that I'm working remote, I really miss, like those, like just those team outings. And I thought back about all of the companies I worked at, and the best ones, it was the same thing. We had at one of the companies, there were these like walks that we'd all go on. It was just around the park and stuff. And another one, it was like, let's all go get coffee at this one particular place. It's just this thing about a team and like just getting like, but it just sort of comes from being in the office. And then that idea of like, yeah, let's go all take a break together and get out of the office that I sort of miss. So definitely enjoyed that when it was at Red Owl. We the Froyo Fridays were a big
Froyo Fridays, man.
Froyo Friday was
great
awesome.
Idea.
Yeah, exactly. Usually one person stayed behind in the office and the rest of everybody else is gone. There was like one person who was like, it's not for me. It's like, all right.
Yeah, I dig that. I mean, I feel like since everybody's a little bit more remote, the losing those, you feel it, you feel those kind of team building engagement. So in the office and out the office, I like that.
Yeah.
All right, cool. I'll keep things rolling. My pairing is going to be Green Jackets and Legacy. And so this is kind of leading into the Masters Golf Tournament, which kicks off next week, which I'm excited about because I'm the first Masters tournament that I'm going to get to go to. A friend of mine won the lottery. And so we're going to be attending a practice round. But I always love about this tournament, like the end of the tournament when the winners announced and they have the green jacket ceremony, which is, this tradition where the previous year's champion presents the green jacket to the new champion. I just think it's such a cool moment in sports where that jacket represents it so much more than just like a trophy. It's that symbol of history and that legacy that lasts long after. So Green Jackets and Legacy is going to be my pairing, and we'll pass it around. Casey, quick intro and your pairing.
Absolutely. So my name is Casey. I'm the director of Army Applications Lab. Before I joined AAL, I was a biodefense scientist at the Army's Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases. And my pairing is chicken wings and blue cheese. I grew up in Buffalo. I don't know what this ranch is in Texas. It's blue cheese, guys. It's blue cheese.
I'm always when they ask, I'm always, can I get both, the ranch and the blue cheese? But blue cheese, are you going sauce? Are you going dry rub? Is there anything specific that you want on that wing?
I mean, if you're going pure, you need butter and Frank's hot sauce as the sauce on the wings.
Yeah, it's proper.
I typically like mild, but nonetheless. So yeah, I am a sauce kind of girl.
That's nice. Strong, very strong pairing. Well, again, welcome. Pumped to have you. And Guy, a quick intro and your pairing.
Sure. So Guy Filippelli, as you said before, have kind of evolved from, I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, by the way, and evolved from being an Army officer to working at the NSA to launching a couple of companies and then now running this investment firm, Squadra Ventures. I'm going to go for just a pairing that is maybe just something I enjoy. I'm going to say vanilla ice cream and honey. I love the texture when the honey kind of gets cold and it's in that vanilla ice cream, and it's like a dangerous late night snack for me because I feel like I could eat 2 gallons of it. So that's my pairing.
I now have a plan for the weekend.
Just honey. You don't need anything else on it.
Well, and if you really want to take it, if you want a triple pairing, you throw a little peanut butter in there.
Whoa.
And then it's,
that's getting crazy now.
Really? Yeah. I mean,
I do like honey and peanut butter. I don't think I've used that pairing, but honey and peanut butter is good. So
throw some vanilla ice cream.
Throw it on vanilla.
Just let me know, Mr. Bruno.
Yeah, that's dangerous. Awesome. I love it. Yeah, a lot of food in this one. I dig that.
Yep.
Cool. All right. Well, let's just kind of transition into the core of today's episode. So as I mentioned, we're driving into this ecosystem surrounding veteran-led defense tech startups, and how founders are navigating this space, how organizations like AAL and the Commit Foundation are kind of help clearing the path for these founders. So just to kind of quickly paint the picture for our listeners on where we stand in the defense tech ecosystem. So according to PitchBook, investors funneled nearly $115 billion globally into defense tech startups between 2021 and 2024, which is up from 58 billion over the previous 4 years. And McKinsey had a fact that the U.S. has more than 1,000 venture-backed companies operating in the defense tech sector. Seems a bit low. Honestly, it seems like there's more than that. But now we've somewhat, set this table, and now I want to bring our guest to speak a little bit more about the leadership style evolution from military to startups. And Guy, I want to begin with you. So, starting with your journey from, an Army officer to founder to investor, you've kind of sat in a lot of these seats. And so you'll have a good lens to relate to this, but walk us through that transition and share some of the unique challenges and benefits that you experienced as a veteran founder.
Sure. So, well, first of all, I'll start off by saying, in a way, I was fortunate. I was a computer science kid before I was a military guy. I always wanted to be a programmer. I don't think we called it software engineering at the time. And, I loved that. That was my superpower as a kid. For people who are older, they'll remember the bulletin board system, the BBS world, and the cracking and hacking worlds early on. And that was kind of my jam. Then I made this crazy decision, really influenced by my dad, to go to West Point and give that a shot and become an Army officer. And actually, when I showed up at West Point, I started off as a computer science major. And it's a true story and a little bit short-sighted, but I made the decision that West Point didn't have a very good computer science program and that I was never going to use it. So I thought, why am I studying this? So I switched over to economics. I had a great experience doing that. I got this scholarship. I went over to Oxford for 2 years, and I came back in the Army, and 9/11 happened a couple of years after that. I was a young Army intel officer in Germany, on my way to Germany, really. I hadn't got there yet, working for Intelligence Security Command. And, I will tell you that one of the beauties of the military is that, I think we've all faced it, but you get to do things that you're completely non-qualified for, right? And I was this young 26-year-old kid, and I get on this video conference with my boss's boss's boss, who at the time was the 2-star head of Army Intelligence Security Command, and he's explaining to the global, this VTC of all these different MI officers that we're in a really bad place because we had a whole suite of intelligence capabilities. The Army used to have these things called ASAS workstations, and on those ASAS workstations, you had a suite of tools that allowed you to model the Russian and Chinese threats in order of battle, and all these things that in 2001 we determined we would never need to worry about again, by the way. But we were about to send a whole bunch of soldiers into Afghanistan, and we had no tools to do it. So my boss basically, he kind of framed it as a Manhattan Project like thing. And he said, I'm looking for young Army intel officers who could run software teams. And if you could, please let me know. And he had this vision around, it was called the Information Dominance Center, and it was in partnership with DARPA. And it was this idea of putting analysts next to developers and rapidly deploying. We're going to break traditional software engineering principles. We're going to do rapid development, all these things. And so I applied, and I got the job. And this guy ended up, General at the time, Major General Keith Alexander, ended up becoming the NSA director over the next 5 years. And I became one of his technical, henchmen. I was, and I built this reputation up for being somebody who could run a software team and extract a lot of value out of them. Because as Mike hopefully would tell you, even though it got to points in time where I maybe didn't understand particular languages or structure, but I understood enough about software engineering. And this is really important. I understand enough about software engineering that I understood what was possible and what wasn't. And I also understood, I used to say I could call a little bit of bullshit on software engineers. And they would, again, I would use Mike Gruen in great respect here. Where it was like, oh, this is going to take me a week. Okay, great. I know it won't. Let's have it tomorrow and take a look at it. I know you can download a library and pull that down, and et cetera, et cetera. So Anyway, that was a great journey for me. It took me to Iraq for a year. It took me to Afghanistan for a year. It took me to NSA, all these things. And then I got out in 2007. And, you know, a lot of people, I'm trying to keep this brief, but I'll say that a lot of people think about the transition from like military founder to say startup CEO. That feels like a very, very bold step. And it is, especially when you're evolving to a product company, venture-backed product company. My first step wasn't. My first step was to running a defense services company. Mm-hmm. So I started a contracting company called Barrico Technologies. And all we really did was we were just the private sector version of what I'd been doing for the last 5 years in the Army. We bootstrapped it. We didn't raise any money. 5 years later, we're doing 30 million in revenue. It was a really great experience. And we had learned how to run a company. So with that experience, I learned how to run a company. Mm. And we ended up eventually selling that. And then I had this crazy idea that was a little bit of a crazy idea to start this cybersecurity company. And then we started Red Owl, and we raised all this venture capital, and we hired all these amazing people like Mike, and we grew that and eventually sold that. And then finally after that, I was 45 years old. And this is about 6 years ago, 44 years old. And I felt like I finally had a bit of an opinion. I'd made enough right decisions and enough wrong decisions. And I thought, you know what, I could either start another company or I could try to spend the rest of my life working with the next generation of founders. And that's what we decided to do. So we conceived this notion of Squadra. And originally it wasn't really focused on defense tech. That was part of the theme. I will tell you that in 2019, it wasn't even a theme, but we were committed to doing really three things: defense tech, cyber, and then we had a third theme called veteran founders, where we would do anything where there was a veteran founder. And we've deprecated that theme since, not because we don't want to back veterans, but because we can't be experts in all these new things. So anyway, it's been a great journey. We've built up this neat team, and that's what we do now. But I will just, in closing, just say that like my journey has been one where every inflection point, every step in the step function has given me like a completely different set of learnings. Mm-hmm. And, but they all built on each other. And I think what's sometimes more courageous is when I see founders jump from being like in the military to running a tech startup. Like, I didn't do that. Mine was a little bit more of a gradual, patient pursuit, if you will. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what I generally recommend for people, by the way, because it can be really, really intimidating the other way.
And when I think of Guy Filippelli, patience definitely is the first thought that comes to my mind.
Well, I don't. In hindsight, there's a strategic,
yes,
there's a strategic patience to it, right?
I wanted to also just really quickly, touch on the Commit Foundation. So if you can maybe just spend a little bit of time expanding on, what that mission is as well.
Sure. So all these worlds deeply interact with each other. But we had I was about 10 years ago, 12 years ago, I had gotten this reputation of being somebody that a lot of veterans could come to and talk to if they had funky ideas on how to transition into the private sector. I had a partner working with me, an exceptional woman, Anne-Marie Craig. And she had, her husband was this amazing guy who eventually came to work with us, is an amazing guy who came to work with us at Red Owl, Les Craig. And so we were this kind of quirky group of former military, former government people, and we really had a passion for helping vets think about their next steps. And essentially, the other side of that is I was always frustrated by the military veteran space where, and this is where I get very careful when I say these things, but in some ways, we've massively resourced the physically and mentally wounded side of the veteran space. And we've massively under-resourced the transition support to people who haven't haven't faced that. I always ask people, even today, we'll talk to somebody who's passionate about veterans, and they'll say, "Oh, I give money to the Wounded Warrior Foundation. I give money to this and that." And I say, you know how many soldiers got wounded in combat last year? And they'll say, they'll come up with a number, and I don't know, 10,000. They'll say, where? Right? Like, Casey, it's like 10, and they were secret, and we can't even talk about them. Right? And then I say, do you know how many soldiers transitioned into the private sector? And it's like 200,000. Mm-hmm. So the problem is huge. We can't solve it. It's an unsolvable problem, but we can really make a big impact on it. So we built this organization up. It's run now by an exceptional person named JC Glick. And we help about 1,000 people a year make the move and accelerate into the next phase of their life. Mm-hmm. And I always say, like, our mission is to get people to stop identifying as veterans. Right? Like, if you don't identify, if you are Mike Gruen, the podcast, the founder, if you are so-and-so the lawyer, if you are so-and-so the venture capitalist, now you've transitioned. And that's what the mission is of Commit.
Yeah, it's interesting. One shout out to another former podcast guest, Les, was on with us. Great guy. But the Commit Foundation, in my kind of role of sourcing, folks to join us, I talk to a lot of vets who are transitioning into leadership roles in startups, and I've had multiple shout out the Commit Foundation. And I'll share a quick feedback. One of these individuals was a colonel in the Army, started as a VP of business development in a startup, and he told me that the Commit Foundation helped him come up with a framework for his career search for the right opportunity. And those three things were to do something that you're passionate about, to be part of a team of people that you trust, and then a company that would provide you the autonomy to really make a difference. And he said, when I had that framework, it really made things a lot easier to figure out what type of company I wanted to be a part of. So I just want to share that feedback with you.
Well, I'll say one last thing on this. Like, there was an engineering decision made early on that I think has turned out to be a good one, which is we would never allow ourselves we're not a job placement organization, and we will never take money from any firm for helping a veteran get placed inside of it. Even if a firm said, listen, why don't you help me? I need to find, you're seeing 1,000 vets a year. I'm paying technical recruiters $20,000 a year, $30,000 a year per person. Why don't you help me find 5 or 6 people, and we'll give you that donation. Mm-hmm. Right. And which is the way a lot of these programs eventually get sucked into, because we all need money. All these nonprofits need money. And it's so hard to resist that. Mm-hmm. Right. As soon as you go down that road, as soon as you take that money, you lose your bias. You gain bias. You lose your unbiased perspective. And so we've worked really hard to stay donation-based, to never allow ourselves to financially benefit. I'm not even talking about personally benefit, organizationally benefit from the transaction. Right. And so we only exist to help give people a framework, not to get them a job. Yeah. We exist to change the way you think about your future, not to place you somewhere. Yeah. And that's caused, look, that's always been a source of debate, right? Like even with funders, sometimes they'll say, well, how many are you getting these people jobs? No. Well, why are we, and then it turns into a Seinfeldian like discussion of like, what, you sound like an organization of nothing, and then you're like, well, kind of.
That was a good reference.
So anyway.
Well, I've got a lot to dig into on some of that story as well, but I want to shift gears quickly to Casey. So Casey, why don't you just kind of give the listeners that might be unfamiliar with Army Applications Lab, what is the mission and how is it different from maybe some other traditional DoD innovation pathways?
Yeah, absolutely. So at AAL, our mission is to get the best technology in the hands of warfighters as quickly as possible. There are a whole host of people across the Army who have a role in that. Our niche in that space at AAL is we exist to expand the Army's access to our civil innovation base, specifically non-traditional industry. And I know to your listeners, nobody's going to question why that's important. But I love to throw out the number that 60 years ago, 2/3 of all R&D spending in this country was government funded. Today, it is 20% and continuing to fall. With defense budgets remaining relatively static with respect to inflation, but our wish list of technologies we want to get our soldiers getting longer, we can't afford to build everything from scratch. We've got to leverage all of the great work going on in commercial industry and AI and cyber and robotics and autonomy and figure out how to pivot that in. But even if we're talking about a big company thinking about how to do that pivot, big or small, they're not built like Lockheed Martin. They're not built like Raytheon. They're not built like Boeing. They haven't built their business model around government procurement cycles. Mm-hmm. They're built around commercial procurement cycles. Mm-hmm. And that means we've got to align the incentives that make it attractive for them to grow a second line of business into the DoD. And that's really the whole framework for what AAL does. Mm-hmm. So whether we're using SBIR, you mentioned our Spartan program that leverages SBIR funding, whether it's using the research development, testing and engineering or RDT&E funding that we have, all these principles of like improving access, improving transparency, moving capital faster are at the core of what we do, because we know if we're not a good business partner at AAL and the DoD, these companies will just walk back to the commercial sector because they don't need us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was reading up on that, on the Spartan kind of model, and it's really clear cut. I love how you guys are very, straightforward about how it's different and how it can benefit these folks. But I want to bring it back into the, kind of like the founder mold, and maybe some things that you might see for, startups that are coming through the AAL kind of portfolio or pipeline, if you will. And same with you, Guy, in terms of, maybe from commit to Squadra. But, what are some of the common skill sets that you all see for us? For example, we talked to a lot of veteran turned founders that are very strong operators. And, it seems to be consistent across the board. But what are some of the areas that you see them, kind of exceeding, and then also areas that you maybe see them falling short?
So I can start. I think one area that's a challenge, even if you're a veteran, when you're coming to work with the DoD, is if we have this weird dichotomy where your customer is really the acquisition professional, but the customer is not the end user.
Yeah.
Right. And you have to figure out this weird interplay between how do I design for adoption, right? The same way you would in the commercial world. How do you get access to the end users while still ensuring that the customer in ASALT, you're meeting all the requirements for them to buy it at the end of the day. And I see a lot of smaller companies, even if there is a veteran involved or a veteran on the leadership team, kind of struggle with how to manage that, because that's a side of the Army that they're not used to. The second thing that I see a lot is companies and founders assume that the government will pay more money for more of the capability faster than we ever intended. And they make either go-to-market decisions on their commercial trajectory, or they make the decisions on how much and what kind of venture capital, they accept, predicated on this false notion of there's this massive government payday coming really, really soon. And when it doesn't materialize, unless they have deep venture backing or commercial revenue, that's when you can see companies fail. So, if we're companies getting really honest with themselves, asking their government stakeholders, is there a requirement document that will lead to procurement? What is the timeline? Getting into the federal budget, figuring out how much is there and what is your real total addressable market in the DoD. They're not skill sets that are baked into working in the commercial sector. They require some different tools. And it's something that startups that want to work in defense, I think, really need to learn.
Yeah, Guy, I'm curious on your thoughts on some of that.
could probably talk for 22 hours on this topic, like a Cory Booker like overnight Senate conversation at this point. But I'll say this: I'll try to actually. I really could say a lot, so I'll try to just pick a few, maybe non-obvious reflections with respect to military founders. The obvious ones are around effort and integrity and passion and leadership and all these things, right? Clearly, which are really important, by the way. Here's a few of the non-obvious ones. Number one, leadership in startups. I've often used the analogy of a lot of military leaders are taught, because when you're a platoon leader, when you're a company commander, in the Army, one thing that you don't have is you don't choose your people. You get the job. And so what you're taught at the same time, and you can't get rid of people. So your job as a leader is to maximize the performance of your team. And you look at so there's an analogy there with like the head coach of an NFL football team who doesn't choose the roster. Mm. One of the things I like to tell CEOs is your first job is not to be the head coach, it's to be the GM. Your first job is to set the roster. And that is a very hard thing for a lot of military founders to be okay with, because they take it as their responsibility to make the Mike Gruens, the Casey Perleys of the world better when maybe they're not the right person for the job. Okay, that's number one. Number two, I think that there's also you learn in the startup world the importance of sometimes selling what's not on the truck versus what's on the truck. So there's I don't want to call it an ethical line, but you've got to be able to sell ahead a little bit. You got to be able to sell vision. Now, funny enough, some military, it depends what kind of jobs you had in the military and what kind of units you were a part of, because sometimes, I've had military founders who are CEOs of ours who are too good at that. And then I have to go into this mode of tell me, don't sell me, and I the last thing I'll say is, I wrote an article kind of once that was written about one of my military founders who I love dearly, but it was called Stop Thinking You Need to Outthink the World Every Day. All right. I was going to title it that or Shut Up and Execute. And the idea was like every board meeting we had was like a reinvention of the world intellectually, a redesign of all the fundamental assumptions that we had had. And it was like, look, you got to give this time. You got to execute. You got to stay focused, right? And so I have a lot of fun, and all these things are meant to be windows into probably lots of topics that I do love. But the last thing I will say that's important for military founders that I will say more at an advice level, no, the one thing that you generally don't have, unless you're making the move that I made, like which was to stay in my sector when I started that government contracting company. The one thing that most military founders lack when they leap into a new industry is they lack wisdom and network and relationships and instincts in that market. And so just be very aware of that. That's really important. And if not you, somebody on your team better bring that. Because if you feel like you're going to figure it out because you're smart and brilliant, you will, hopefully before you run out of money. But it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of effort. And so I always say, like, are you ready to, the question I always ask myself with any founding team is, are you ready to dominate that market? Dominate, not survive, not succeed, dominate. And so usually that comes down to technology. It comes down to product. It comes down to idea. but it also comes down with your ability to maneuver the ecosystem. And, it's hard enough to do it in DoD, which most people just came out of. Now you got to layer the whole commercial thing around it. And so that's what we look for. We look for founders who just sort of have that magical ability to not just get the job done of building something valuable and selling it, but being able to maneuver the entire industry that they're operating in. And it's really hard to find those people.
Mm. Yeah, it's a good point, Casey. I was listening to an interview that you were doing, where we talk a lot about dual use on this podcast, and everybody's got a really strong opinion on it in terms of, building first where and when, and knowing when to pivot. And I think you had made the recommendation of you would just say to building commercial first, actually, kind of get that stabilized. And then, that allows you a little bit more of a runway to tackle maybe these longer drawn out sales cycles in defense. Is that something that you see, maybe just talk to it through from the AAL lens, how folks maybe coming through there are thinking about dual use as the concept and where they're seeing that use case in a commercial market before, or does that come later, or how you advise on that?
I mean, absolutely. So first of all, as the government, we don't get to advise the companies. They get to pick their path in a sense, right? Here's what I'll say. I mean, my advice has always been, if you want to work in defense, you either need deep venture backing or you need revenue. And back when I started in 2019, pretty much every company that walked through our door was dual use. And at the time, our budget at AAL is better than it was when we started. And like everybody else, it took 2 years to get in the congressional budget. We didn't have the money to just do a straight up build of a new robotic arm or a straight up build of a new generator. We had to take something that already existed and then try to harden it or try to pivot it in. And we didn't have enough money to make it not a Frankenstein product, right? We couldn't rip it down and build a solely defense version. So I got in my head that, you really needed that commercial product first. What I've seen in the last 2 years, especially since the wars in Ukraine and the wars in the Middle East have started, is a rise in what I call low-cost lethality startups. I've got a list of about 25, most of whom are venture-backed, for whom, let's be honest, there is no dual use path. They may claim, I can do controlled avalanches at ski resorts. That's great. Let's all admit that that's not, we're pretending on that dual use case there, right? For those guys, the advice is a little different, right? Because they don't have to make the choice of, do I go commercial to get revenue or not? DoD's their only focus and will be their only focus from day one. So, as those companies come in, the advice may be a little bit different for them, right? And my advice to them there is, you really got to figure out what the DoD wants, not what you think the DoD wants. What does the DoD want? Try to get input from the Army or the Navy or the Air Force to shape it early, because you really only have one shot at this. Because if it doesn't work, you can't fall back on commercial revenue.
I'll provide a little bit of a maybe just evidence. I'll say that I think there's a lot of great advice there from Casey. I will provide a couple of examples of where we've seen it. It's not always necessary, right? So, and I'll give you two companies in our portfolio. One is this company, Shift 5, which also traces back to the Mike Rowe and Guy Filippelli founding of the galaxy. It's
like Kevin Bacon, 7 degrees of separation.
There's a lot of genealogy to be done here, but Shift 5 was a company that was founded by 3 military guys who had worked on special projects within DoD to understand vulnerabilities in our weapon systems and our vehicles, our planes and trains. Planes and helicopters and stuff like that. And so, but when they came to us early on with this vision of building this dual use company, the idea was they knew that if they could protect an Osprey or an Army Black Hawk from being hacked, they could do the same thing for a Boeing jet or an Amtrak train or, piece of mining equipment for that matter. We were very adamant about starting and focusing on the government use case. Again, why? Well, that's where they had all their relationships. That's where they had all their credibility. And we knew it was important enough to DoD that DoD would be willing to be a partner in funding it. We didn't need it to be all of it, but we needed him to be a partner. And so anyway, that worked out great. Another one, just and now it's going dual use. So now we've launched these huge commercial relationships, which is great. It's worked out very well. The second one, we have a company in our second fund called Primordial Labs that's working on human machine interfaces to allow humans to interact with drones or robots or complex systems on the battlefield through natural language. Amazing company. There's massive implications for Amazon warehouses in the future. There's massive implications for homes. I mean, this is a really big idea company. But again, these guys came out of Lockheed Skunk Works, Sikorsky Aircraft, DARPA. That's where all their relationships lie. So I think if you've got commercial DNA, then ride the commercial DNA. If you've got government DNA, it's okay. But you've got to get this plane off the ground, right? And for me, that's getting a product in market that somebody's using, that somebody's validating. And, you need as a founder to think about where is that likely to come from?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think also it's just like understanding, like timing the market right. I love the point of the relationships. I think that's super key. Like where is your greatest network? Maybe start there and then determine where you might be able to make some sales first before trying to balance both sides. Anything else, I guess, before we transition to the final segment, just in terms of, we think about the founder, kind of DNA of folks transitioning from the military into these roles. And it doesn't even need to be at the founder level. It could just be more in like the, hands-on role. Something that we've seen a lot of is, on the commercial startup side, the role of product manager is always an interesting role because everybody's got a different definition of it, but we've seen it evolve quite a bit. And especially with AI kind of coming into the playing field here now, the idea of somebody that's really just a subject matter in their industry, but being able to connect the dots with how technology can solve problems within their field. And so we've seen a lot of positions for product folks coming from military into, if it be a defense tech or just a commercial, startup environment. Anything that jumps out to you all in terms of the types of roles that you've seen be created, if it's a solutions engineer, if it's product types of individuals that the military skill set rolls into nicely?
I'm happy to talk for a second. I actually think that it's more about the person. And I will tell you that I know of, if I think about core functions of a firm, I think about product, engineering itself, product management. I think about marketing. I think about sales. I think about finance. I think about HR. I think about customer success, right? These are all core functions of any startup, right? I can 100% tell you rock stars in every one of those functions who are former military. For example, one of the greatest marketing minds of our generation is a guy named Anthony Noto, who's a West Point football player grad, who talks, he got out of the military. He went to work for Procter & Gamble to learn how to do marketing. Procter & Gamble, the ultimate marketing engine. How do I convince the consumer that they need to spend $7 for a bottle of shampoo that costs 22 cents to produce. That's Procter and Gamble. And then Noto ended up going to Goldman Sachs. He became the youngest partner in Goldman Sachs history. And then he got asked to be the CFO of the NFL. And then he went from being the CFO of the NFL, going back to Goldman Sachs, where he helped take Twitter public, and he became the CEO of Twitter. And now he's the CEO of SoFi. Right? That's a hell of a journey. But it started off because he became a marketing guy, and he would tell you that. I've heard him, been lucky enough to watch him many times talk about that story. I know amazing people who are just numbers people, and they got into finance. I know people who are incredible. The customer success line, of course, almost anybody can do that. Because it's one of these things where we know how to get things done and keep people informed. And that's like basic training that most of us had. But my point to military people would be, that doesn't necessarily need to pigeonhole you. It's just a matter of the time that you have to get there. If you're really driven and you're like, look, I'm a numbers person. I want to be a CFO. I want to go into finance. Then go and finish any studies that you need to get an MBA, and then go down that path. But so I really, again, there's plenty of evidence to suggest that you could do anything. It's a question of what role are you able to be better than everybody else at?
Mm-hmm.
I completely agree. Everybody's got their own unique skill set. And I think you want to define the role that enhances that. Just from a trends perspective, an interesting trend I'm seeing, I'm starting to see some of these smaller companies as they grow who maybe struggle to get access to military end users on a consistent basis, hire guys that are transitioning or have recently transitioned to be that end user in-house. And represent the voice of the soldier in the design process. And I think it's an indictment on the DoD that they need to do that in terms of us, our ability to get them access to the end users. And I'm intrigued to see how that is going to impact product development.
And I want to add one quick thing there, which is really something to think about for people. You're exactly right. Even I think about the companies in our portfolio, like Primordial Labs. We have a young ex-Marine who served that role. Right now, here's the flip side for people. There is, you kind of have a choice when you're getting out. Do you want to go and immediately add value somewhere? Or do you want to go and learn a new skill set? Okay, this is a very fundamental choice. I will tell you, startups are not a place to learn a new skill set. Number one, that is a fact. Okay. People think it's not a fact, and it absolutely is a fact. And where you go learn, if you go back to the Anthony Noto example, he went to Procter and Gamble to fundamentally learn marketing, because big companies are great at teaching and training and developing people, right? Oracle forever was the place to go to learn sales. GE was the place to go to learn engineering, project management, things like that, right? And so I will just tell you, you have to think about your path. Not that you're going to top out, but okay, now you're a customer success guy because you got out and you could add value tomorrow in customer success. And so you landed that job at a startup, and you'll bounce from that startup to a new startup, to a new startup, to a new startup. But there's a path there. But there's also another path to say, I'm going to make it. I'm going to take, I don't want to say a step back. A lot of people think I'm going to go work for a big company. That's in a way a step back. The other places that I also will tell you is there's like this basic set of, do I want to go add value right now somewhere? Okay, that's a path. Do I want to go learn something? That's a kind of a different path that really take me to and then there's do I want to go inject myself into a pretty significant player in the ecosystem because I'm going to kind of make a play on brand for myself, regardless of even what the role is? And I would argue that's another very unappreciated path. So like somebody getting out right now, and that's why you go to, say, an Anduril or a Google or a Facebook or a Palantir, or, those are brand moves, because then you're now, and you're going to learn something too. But so all these things are valuable, and you just have to think about how do you, it's like playing chess with your life, right? It's not checkers. It's not what's the next move. It's what's the next 6 moves, right? And so that's where it gets hard, but that's what's fun about it.
Yeah, that's great feedback. Yeah, we've run a lot of episodes in the past too of folks that came from like the big tech, your Metas, your Apples, their Amazons, and then transitioned into startup world. And the experience that they gained is invaluable, but there's also a lot of experience that they were actually a little bit too coddled in those environments, and they don't have that support team that they maybe did. So there's a lot of experience that they gain from big company, small company before maybe jumping into your own thing to round you out. I like that perspective, Guy. In the essence of time, I'm going to transition us into the final segment. This is the 5-second scramble. It'll be a quick rapid fire Q&A. We're going to lead with you, Guy. I think Mike was teed up to hit you with the most personal of questions.
Yeah. So. And we'll abbreviate a little bit. Normally there's about 10 questions, but we'll keep it a little shorter. So what stage company is your favorite to work with?
Seed 2.
All right. What qualities do you look for in a founder?
Magnetism, authenticity, integrity, passion.
Nice. Is there someone you'd consider a mentor?
General Alexander, Vinny Viola, my father.
Let's skip ahead a little bit.
You can ask me as many as you want.
I know, but time.
I'll stick.
Oh, hey, nice.
Nice. Thank
Mike.
you. What's the favorite app on your phone?
Chess.
What's your comfort food?
Pasta.
Nice. What's something you're really bad at but enjoy doing?
Golf.
That's
number one answer.
Maybe I should stop asking. What military leadership skill do you have that you found to be most valuable in your career?
Empathy.
What did you want to be when you grew up?
What do I, or what did I?
What did you want to, when you were a little kid, what did you want to grow up to be?
I didn't know.
You didn't know? That's I think, the last one, our favorite one. What's a cause or corporate philanthropy that's near and dear to you? I think we know the answer, but throw it out there anyway.
Yeah, for sure. Helping people who, a friend of mine used to say that, and he's since passed away, which was a huge loss for the military community, a guy named Anthony DeToto. But he used to say that what all veterans have in common is they all wrote a check payable up into their lives, whether or not they ever came close to cashing it. And that's the reason why we owe them, what we can do for them. And that's why Commit is near and dear to my heart. How do we help these men and women who said to their country, I'm willing to do whatever it takes? How can we help them jump to the next level of their journey?
All right. Very good.
Good stuff. Casey, you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, let's rock and roll. What is one word to describe AAL's culture?
I'm going to give you 2. Fun and quirky. We sometimes do have children's robots running around the lab.
That's a great visual. What tech domain gets you the most excited today?
Personally, it's biotech because that's my background. But like in my job, it's probably the emergence of low-cost lethality.
What's one of your favorite leadership principles that you look for in founders?
Being authentic. Be who you are.
Aside from capital, what do you believe is one of the most beneficial in-kind services for startup founders today?
Knowledge of how to navigate particularly tricky segments of the DoD, like fuse board, authority to operate, airworthiness, all these barriers that we've set up that oftentimes you need consultants to help you get through, unfortunately.
Yeah, well said. Do you believe in ghosts?
My daughter does. I don't, but she's 3 and swears they live in her bedroom.
Is a hot dog a sandwich?
No.
What is it?
It's a hot dog.
That's right. That's right. What's a charity or cause that's near and dear to you?
Science and arts education.
What's a surprising hobby of yours?
I play orchestral harp. I've been on 120 live and studio recordings because
that's awesome.
Don't all scientists play harp? Come on now.
Yeah, that's a great pairing right there. All right, now I gotta have to follow up question to that. What is one of your biggest non-traditional kind of songs that you'll rip on the harp?
So I got the opportunity in college to play with a cello rock band, and I got to bastardize the cadenza from Waltz of the Flowers to be the lead into Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven. And that was pretty fun.
Please tell me this is somewhere released on Spotify so we can get our hands on it.
It's definitely recorded somewhere. I don't know if it is on Spotify.
Last question. What was your dream job as a kid?
Given that I once took a microscope to a tea party when I was 3, scientist doctor was pretty established early on.
Nice. Chasing your dreams. I love it. Well, that is a wrap. Casey and Guy, thank you both for joining us on the PAIR program and paving the way for this next generation of mission-driven startups. Excited to kind of keep tracking the work that you all are doing.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you all.